It was the summer of 2018, and a group of friends, Mark, Sarah, David, and Lisa, decided to take a break from their hectic city lives and go camping in the dense forests of Blackwood, Oregon. Known for its pristine beauty and secluded trails, Blackwood also carried a sinister reputation. Locals often whispered tales of hikers who vanished without a trace, but the group dismissed them as exaggerated folklore. The campsite they chose was deep within the woods, accessible only by a narrow, overgrown trail. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, casting an eerie orange glow through the tall pines. They set up their tents, built a fire, and laughed over ghost stories, unaware that one of those stories was about to become their reality. As the night deepened, the forest grew unnervingly silent. The usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves were absent, replaced by an oppressive stillness. Around midnight, David, the most adventurous of the group, suggested exploring the nearby area. "Come on, we've got flashlights. What's the worst that could happen?" he said with a grin. Reluctantly, the others agreed. Armed with flashlights, they ventured deeper into the woods. About a mile from their campsite, they stumbled upon something peculiar, a large, circular clearing where the trees seemed unnaturally twisted. At the center was an old, decrepit cabin, its windows shattered and its door hanging on one hinge. "I don't like this," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. But David was already moving toward the cabin. "It's probably just an old hunting lodge. Let's check it out." Inside, the air was thick with the smell of decay. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved deeply into the wood. On a dusty table, they found a journal. Its pages were filled with frantic handwriting, describing dark rituals, summoning something referred to only as the Watcher. Suddenly, a loud creak echoed from upstairs. Mark froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The group held their breath as the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps descended the stairs. Flashlights flickered, and the atmosphere grew colder. They backed toward the door, but it slammed shut on its own. Panic set in as they heard a low, guttural growl coming from the shadows. In the chaos, Sarah screamed, "Run!" The group bolted out of the cabin, sprinting back toward their campsite. The growling grew louder, now accompanied by the sound of branches snapping behind them. When they finally reached their tents, they realized David was missing. "We have to go back for him," Sarah sobbed, but Mark shook his head. "It's too dangerous. We need help." They packed up in record time and drove to the nearest ranger station. But when they explained what had happened, the rangers exchanged uneasy glances. "You were in Blackwood, weren't you?" one asked. When they nodded, the rangers sighed. "We've heard stories about that place. People disappearing, strange sightings. We'll send a team to look for your friend." But he trailed off, his face grim. David was never found. Weeks later, Sarah discovered the journal among her belongings, though none of them remembered bringing it back. On its final page, new words had been scrawled in blood-red ink. "The Watcher is always watching." The group never went camping again. After David's disappearance, the group struggled to return to normalcy. Nightmares plagued them, and Sarah often woke up drenched in sweat, hearing David's voice whispering her name. Lisa quit her job, unable to focus, and Mark became obsessed with the journal, poring over its cryptic entries late into the night. A month after their return, the group received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "You left something behind." Attached was a blurry photo of David, standing in the twisted clearing near the cabin. His eyes were vacant, and his face was pale, but he was unmistakably alive, or so it seemed. "Who sent this?" Lisa demanded, her voice shaking. Mark frowned. "No clue, but if he's alive, we have to go back." Sarah vehemently disagreed. "No! Whatever that place is, it's not normal. We barely escaped last time." But Mark's determination was unshakable. Despite Sarah's protests, Mark and Lisa convinced her to return to Blackwood with them. A week later, they found themselves on the same overgrown trail, hearts pounding with every step. They reached the clearing as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the twisted trees. The cabin looked even more decrepit than before, its windows dark and foreboding. Inside, the air was heavy, and the strange carvings on the walls seemed to writhe in the dim light of their flashlights. The journal lay open on the table, though none of them had touched it. On the open page was a new entry, written in the same frantic handwriting. "You brought them back." "Good." Lisa let out a choked sob, but Mark pressed forward. "David, are you here?" he called out. They hesitated, but Mark led the way down the creaking staircase. The basement was cold and damp, with walls covered in claw marks. At the far end, David was slumped against the wall, his face obscured by shadows. "David!" Lisa cried, running toward him. As she approached, his head snapped up, revealing empty eye sockets and a wide, unnatural grin. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice layered with something inhuman. The basement door slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. The growling returned, louder than before, accompanied by the sound of something massive and heavy moving toward them. Mark fumbled for his flashlight, only to see a towering, shadowy figure emerge from the darkness. Its form was indistinct, constantly shifting, but its glowing red eyes were unmistakable. The Watcher had arrived. Lisa screamed as the creature lunged, its long, clawed arm grabbing her and dragging her into the shadows. Mark and Sarah scrambled back up the stairs, only to find the cabin's layout had changed. Every door led back to the basement, and the symbols on the walls now glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. "No way out," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mark grabbed her hand. "We have to fight. We can't give up." He picked up a broken chair leg and swung wildly as the growling closed in around them. Days later, a search party found their abandoned campsite, but no trace of the group. The journal was discovered in the ashes of the cabin, its final page now bearing a single sentence: "The forest always takes what it's owed." Blackwood remains closed to this day, with warning signs posted along every trail. But those brave or foolish enough to venture near the area often report hearing distant screams, faint growls, and the echo of footsteps that never seem to get closer. And some swear they've seen figures standing in the clearing, staring at them from the shadows. Weeks turned into months after Mark, Sarah, and Lisa's disappearance. Their families organized search teams, plastered missing person posters across Oregon, and even hired private investigators. But Blackwood remained silent and unyielding. No one returned from the cursed forest, and the local authorities eventually abandoned the search, labeling it another unexplained incident. 1 year later, in 2019, a team of urban explorers stumbled upon an online forum where users shared legends of haunted locations. The thread about Blackwood Forest caught their attention. Intrigued by the tales of disappearances and ghostly sightings, the group, comprised of Chris, Elena, and Jake, decided to visit the infamous cabin themselves, live streaming their adventure to prove the stories were just superstition. Armed with cameras, drones, and an arsenal of flashlights, the trio entered the forest at dusk. They followed the directions shared in the forum and soon found themselves standing in the twisted clearing. The cabin looked worse than the photos they'd seen, its wooden frames sagging and covered in moss. "We're about to go viral," Jake joked, filming the decaying structure. As they approached the cabin, Elena noticed something strange. The forest behind them seemed darker than it should have been, as though the trees were closing in. She brushed it off, attributing it to her imagination, but her unease grew as they stepped inside. The cabin was eerily cold despite the humid summer air. Dust covered every surface, and the walls were adorned with the same symbols described in the stories. In the center of the room was the journal, its cover warped and stained. Chris opened it cautiously, flipping through the pages. Many were filled with the same frantic handwriting, but toward the back the ink had turned darker, almost like dried blood. One page had fresh writing, "Welcome back." Jake laughed nervously. "Someone's messing with us. This has to be a prank." Suddenly, the front door slammed shut and their cameras flickered. A low growl echoed from the shadows, sending chills down their spines. Elena grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to leave, now." Chris ignored her and continued reading the journal aloud. As he spoke, the symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, pulsating in rhythm with his voice. The growling grew louder, and a faint tapping sound echoed from the ceiling. "What the hell is that?" Jake whispered, aiming his camera upward. The beam of his flashlight revealed long, claw-like scratches gouged into the wooden beams. Before anyone could react, the tapping turned into heavy thuds. Something or someone was moving above them. Panicking, the group ran for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Chris dropped the journal, and as it hit the floor, the room was filled with a deafening roar. The floorboards buckled and a gaping hole opened beneath their feet, swallowing them into the darkness below. The live stream abruptly cut off, leaving viewers horrified and confused. Many dismissed it as a hoax, but others scoured the footage for clues. One frame showed a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes standing in the corner, watching the group. Weeks later, another explorer ventured into Blackwood to investigate. He found their abandoned gear scattered around the clearing, but no sign of the trio. The journal was there, however, lying open on the ground. Its newest entry read, "They came back, and so will you." Since then, anyone who dares to enter Blackwood Forest claims to hear whispers in the wind, urging them deeper into the trees. Some say the whispers call them by name. The cabin still stands, its door always slightly ajar, inviting new victims. And every time someone disappears, the journal gains another entry. The watcher always waits, and the forest always takes. The disappearance of Chris, Elena, and Jake sent shockwaves through the online community. The live stream, though cut off, had gone viral. It sparked heated debates, with skeptics dismissing it as an elaborate prank and believers warning others to stay away from Blackwood Forest. But the mystery only grew deeper when the authorities returned to the clearing and found nothing. The cabin was gone. The entire clearing was empty, overgrown with moss and wildflowers, as though the cursed structure had never existed. Yet the journal was discovered at the exact spot where the live stream had cut out. Authorities confiscated it, but within days the lead investigator vanished from his home. His family reported hearing whispers in the house the night before, and claw marks were found gouged into the walls of his bedroom. In 2021, a paranormal investigation team known as Phantom Seekers decided to take on the legend of Blackwood. The group had built a reputation for exposing fakes and debunking myths, and they believed the cabin and journal were nothing more than a hoax fueled by internet hysteria. Their team consisted of Madison, the leader, Ethan, the tech expert, Claire, the skeptic, and Marcus, the cameraman. The team entered Blackwood Forest with the latest equipment, motion sensors, thermal cameras, and EVP recorders. Madison, determined to uncover the truth, brought along the original journal, which had mysteriously reappeared in her mail weeks earlier, despite being locked away as evidence. As they ventured deeper into the forest, their equipment began to malfunction. The GPS lost signal, and their compasses spun wildly. Ethan shrugged it off. "This forest has a lot of magnetic interference. It's probably natural." But the unease set in when they came across the twisted clearing. The cabin was back. Its presence was undeniable, though it looked more decayed than any photos or descriptions suggested. The door creaked open as if inviting them inside. "This is too perfect," Claire muttered. "Someone rebuilt it for the publicity." Madison hesitated. "Then let's find out who." Inside, the air was stifling, carrying the stench of rot. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly as they entered, reacting to their presence. Marcus aimed the camera at the carvings, noticing the faint sound of whispers that seemed to grow louder the closer he got. Ethan set up motion sensors around the room, but they immediately began to blink erratically, indicating movement that wasn't visible to the naked eye. This isn't right," he stammered. Claire laughed nervously. "All staged. Someone's watching us." Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and the room plunged into darkness. Madison's flashlight flickered as she opened the journal. The pages turned on their own, stopping at a new entry that hadn't been there before. "You brought them back to us. Welcome home." A deafening roar filled the cabin as the ground shook violently. The symbols on the walls burned brightly, illuminating a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. The watcher towered over them, its form shifting and writhing like a living nightmare. Marcus screamed as he was yanked backward into the shadows, his camera falling to the ground. Ethan grabbed Madison and Claire, pulling them toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The watcher's voice echoed around them, a low, guttural sound that seemed to speak directly into their minds. "You cannot leave. You are mine." Desperate, Madison flipped through the journal, searching for anything that could help. On the final page, she found a single phrase scrawled in blood: "Burn it to break the cycle." Without hesitation, she grabbed Ethan's lighter and set the journal ablaze. The fire spread unnaturally fast, consuming the book in seconds. The cabin began to collapse, and the Watcher let out an earth-shaking roar, its form dissolving into black smoke. Madison, Ethan, and Claire managed to break through the door and escape as the cabin crumbled behind them. When they reached the edge of the forest, they turned back, only to find the clearing completely